Welcome to TINAH Talks, where time is not a healer, but we believe that we all have the power to heal ourselves and take our mental well-being into our own hands. This podcast is a byproduct of TINAH, the mental well-being marketplace, and a community platform at timeisnotahealer.com, providing you with the best products for your self-healing journey. Hit subscribe and follow us on socials if you want support on your mental well-being journey. We're your hosts. I'm Kelsey. This is Sophie, and this episode is all about setting boundaries in relationships.
Big topic.
Hey, Sophie, good topic. How's it going?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good, very good. Just a little tired, so don't mind me. I'm going to be chugging some coffee on this call.
Okay, how are you? So it's perfect topic of conversation when you're tired. A big one.
Yeah, a very important one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we wanted to do this episode for a couple of reasons. One, in August, there's a lot of different kind of days going on in the calendar that are related to romance and forgiveness. So August 4th is International Forgiveness Day, and then the whole of August is actually Romance Awareness Month, and we feel like boundaries in relationships is so closely linked, obviously, to can be in personal friendship relationships, can be family relationships, but more specifically with today, I think we're going to focus more on like romantic relationship boundaries. Another reason that we wanted to do this podcast is that I was recently listening to an episode of, I don't know if anyone already listens to this, but Lewis Howes' School of Greatness podcast. It's one of my favorite self-development podcasts to listen to, by the way, if anybody wants a recommendation of a podcast to listen to. I think this one's perfect. Like, he delves into so many self-development concepts in a lot of detail with some really amazing guests. But anyway, on this particular episode that I was listening to recently, he had two relationship coaches on. He had Hussey and Sadia Khan, and they are two very well-known relationship coaches out there, and he had them on the podcast as guests, and they were debating the subject essentially as to why people, men and women, lead like double lives and like the root causes of cheating. And it really fired me up. The episode really fired me up because they delved into quite a lot of topics that hit home to me, in particular around like self-respect in relationships and how you choose your partners based on how you're feeling. And this has been a whole thing for me, a whole journey that I've been going on to kind of build up my self-respect in relationships. So there was a lot in this podcast episode that hit home. Have you listened to his podcast before? Have you listened to either of those coaches?
I haven't listened to them before, so I'm not familiar, but I mean, I can imagine the conversation. It's powerful. You were telling me a little bit about how like the coaches had two very different perspectives. Which I don't know if you want to share a little bit about those perspectives, and then we can dive into like what our opinion is and our experience.
Exactly. They did. They had, so bearing in mind, this is a male and a female coach, right? Relationship coach. So Hussey, he's a British guy. I think they're both British, but he's made it really big in like this relationship coaching world. And one of his concepts was, they were talking about like, you know, if something bad happens to you in a relationship, particularly mainly focusing around like if you're being cheated on, or maybe like you're dealing with I don't want to say like abuse, because that's the further end of the spectrum, but if you're dealing with like kind of small habits or behaviors on a daily basis that you're putting up with that you shouldn't be putting up with, kind of thing, they were the main topic of conversation that they were speaking about. And his point of view was that if something like that happens to you, it's not necessarily your fault. You do need to obviously take accountability of your action, of your side of the story. Exactly. But you need to also find the self-compassion to say, you know, this has happened to me. It's okay. Now I can move on and learn from the mistake. Whereas Sadia's point was that regardless of what has happened to you, again, not talking about like the extremities of like physical or emotional abuse, more like day-to-day bad behaviors, cheating, that kind of thing, that it is actually your fault. If that is happening to you, you don't have the level of self-respect to walk away, even though you've probably seen red flags along the way. And one of the things that she kind of called out in that is that self-respect and responsibility are crucial in maintaining a healthy relationship, which obviously I do agree with that. But when she was talking and the way that she expressed herself on this relationship, on this podcast, I was getting really fired up about this topic, and that's why I wanted to discuss it, because they really hit home for me in different ways, because I can relate to both of the things that they both said. Like, I can relate from his perspective of saying, you know, it's not your fault. You haven't asked somebody to treat you like that.
Right.
You do have to have self-compassion for yourself if that in those situations, because you can't always see, maybe you've got the love goggles on, but also from her perspective of saying it's all your fault. No, it's not. People can't, like, you can't control the way someone treats you. You can control your reaction to it, but you can't control the way somebody treats you in a relationship.
Yeah. No, I agree with all of that. And that's the point I was going to say. Like, we don't have control over other people and their behaviors. And when it's a new person that we're not familiar with, like, we're getting to know them. So we don't necessarily know what they're capable of, what they're bringing to the table. I mean, that's the risk in starting a new relationship, is that you're exploring something with someone and it can go bad or it go good. But it brings, this whole conversation brings a couple of like really key phrases that, like, I think you and I hear a lot in the community. And if you're not hanging around a lot of people who are talking about self-development, I'm sure you guys, people see it all over Instagram now, but it makes me think of a couple of different things, right? Like, you attract, so first off, you attract what you are, right? Like, well, how you are and how you handle yourself and the level of that you're functioning, that's what's going to attract the people around you. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like,
Yeah,
the
100%. 100%.
your what is it? Your vibe attracts your tribe, like that
Yeah,
concept, which I think to a certain degree, right? Like, the common phrase of, we accept the love that we think we deserve,
100%.
which,
Yeah,
like, there, it comes with different levels of consciousness, right? Like, I might not be, I first off, let me say this. Yes, we may attract the current level that we're at, like how we're functioning, how we see ourselves, the current respect that we have for ourselves, the compassion that we have for ourselves. Wherever that's at, that is probably what we are attracting. That's what we're allowing into our lives. But that doesn't mean that that can't change. You might not have the awareness yet, or the level of practice and self-compassion and self-respect to kind of like have more boundaries and barriers and a better understanding of who you are and what you need and what you will tolerate and what you won't tolerate, and feeling confident in setting those boundaries. So, like, it's a level, right? Like, yeah, we might be at that level and that's what we're accepting, but that doesn't mean that it can't change. It doesn't mean that we can't like put those boundaries into place later on. It's about, and I know that this is like so over talked about in this community, but it's all about fucking self-awareness, like your own self-awareness of where you're at, what you're bringing to the table, what you want brought to the table, that kind of thing. And so it's kind of those concepts. And I do agree. I think there's also a different understanding when you're in a relationship, right? Let's just say you're at the awareness that you're at, you attract the person that you attract. It is what it is. And maybe you think you're doing all right. Maybe you haven't worked on some things that you still need to work on, which is why all of a sudden this person that you've attracted is treating you in a certain way. Now, that's not your fault, I don't think. Like, right? You didn't cause that. No one deserves to be treated that way. The moment, though, that those things start happening, that's when it is your responsibility to make the decision of, will I continue to tolerate this? Am I going to stay in the relationship for this? How do I communicate that this is not okay? And like, and then what's the boundary? It's not black or white. Like, I experienced with a guy where there was things that I wasn't quite sure, and I had a really high level of self-awareness. I was working in the psych field. I've dealt with my parents. He was actually a guy who struggled with alcoholism, and it's something for me, like, for those who haven't listened, I know this is going to sound really harsh. Both my parents are alcoholics. My entire life has been surrounded around that and taking care of them and their issues and all that. And so one of the boundaries that I have for myself is I won't date someone who has addictive behavior, like who has addiction issues. Now, if we're together for 30 years and they break their leg and they go on painkillers and that develops, that's a different story. But yeah, in the first 1 to 3 years, if I see any hint of an addictive behavior, I'm out. Like, it's just not for me. And after like my like like my really big serious relationship after high school, it was kind of near end of college. That relationship ended. We broke up, and so I was in like a whole whirlwind, and I got on Tinder, and the first guy I ever dated on Tinder, who I ended up dating for 6 months, turned out to have issues with alcoholism, but it was trickle. It wasn't like I saw it all at once. And so I was kind of questioning, like, is this what I think it is? Or am I just, jumping the gun here and presuming something that's like not really an issue? Maybe like something just happened. And so I had to like talk myself through it and be like, all right, I'm giving this dude 3 strikes, you're out. Like, if these, and I'm talking like incidents, like I came home to his house and we were supposed to have dinner and the house was trashed and he was passed out on the couch with 3/4 a bottle of vodka
Wow.
down. And I was like, I had a whole panic attack. It was, and I was like, okay, is this a thing? Is this a thing that he does? Or is this just like a moment he had a day? Like, I don't know. And so that was the second thing. And then the third, that was like the second strike. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna give it one more try. But like, and I
Yeah.
had really high level self-awareness.
So I think in those situations, you think, is this just a one-off or is this an ongoing behavior? Because I think as
Right.
well, like I know that I've done this in the past where I've like gaslit myself and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh no, it's just like a one-off thing. But then if something else happens, you're like, oh, hold on a minute. But no, it's different this time. And
It
then
was
again,
different.
and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, but hold on a minute. Like, and then you kind of like, I completely get it of like, you know, it's really easy to tell yourself that that's okay because it's a one-off. But when it
Right.
happens 2, 3, 4 times, and thank God you had that 3 strike rule, because God knows where you'd
Yeah.
be now if you didn't. Like, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really hard. It's a very, like you said, it's not black and white. It's no fine line. It's a very fine line between what is it just a one-off, and then is this repeat? Because it
Hmm.
can repeat in different ways as well, and then you're again like just a bit
Hmm.
confused around like blurry lines.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so just to like complete the story, because I know everyone wants to hear it. I'm a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
gossip, so
I
I'll
want to
just like,
hear it.
yeah. I met him. It was great. We hit it off right away. We were seeing each other, and then what was the first? Oh, we went to what was this is the Midwest. We went to Milwaukee to visit his friends, and he got a little loose with the drinking. Like he just drank a little too much, where it was almost like a little too much out in public, a little deal. And I can't remember. There was something specific that happened that he did that it like really threw me off, and I was like, "Ooh, I'm not a fan of that." And right, newish relationship, but we were out and about. We were biking, we were doing stuff. And so I just took it as a grain of salt. Like it was a very low level, like maybe he just drank too much and that's why he said what he said, or like I'm not sure what's happening here. And then the next incident was the one with the where we were supposed to have dinner and I went to his house. We'd had kind of like a disagreement about something, but it wasn't a huge argument. I figured we'd just talk about it when we were having dinner. And when I got there, the house, there's spices all over the floor. And yeah, he was passed out on the couch. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to stick around for this. And you know what's ironic is that I called someone in my family who it was my dad's ex, and my dad at this time has passed, right? So I called my dad's ex because I didn't know what to do. I was like, is this a sign that this is a regular thing that happens? Like asking her, like, is like because I was panicking, like I had an anxiety attack, and she and I don't have that relationship where we would talk about my dad like that. But I just called her, like I didn't have anyone else to call, and she was like, like just give him the benefit of the doubt. And like now I look back and I'm like, bitch, that's what you did with my dad. Like, that's
Yeah,
like, and it
find
didn't
it.
it didn't work out really well. And then the last I said, "Okay, I'll give it one more try, we'll see what happens." And the last go, we were supposed to go sailing with one of his friends. And it was a small lake. He had like a small little sailboat, and we were hanging out at the park near my house. Anyways, I have slackline. I like to slackline, and he was supposed to meet up with me. We had been speaking earlier in the day, and he was supposed to meet up with me. This man rocked up to the park with nothing. No keys, no phone, no wallet, like, and wasted, like totally wasted. And I was like, what have you been doing? I lied. I'm sorry. He had his phone, but he didn't have his wallet and he didn't have his keys because this is a key part. My phone was about to die and we were playing music at the park. And I was like, hey, can I play music on your phone? He was like, sure. His phone was about to die. Well, mine died and then his was about to die. And so I was like, I'm going to close all your apps. I'm not a snooper. That is not my thing. I've never been that way. I trust you until I don't. Right? That's how it is for me. And so I was doing the whole like where you just swipe it closed. I wasn't even looking. He had like 700 pages open and I'm swiping it. And as I swipe, I catch a Tinder profile open. And I was like, and I just asked him. I closed everything. I said, "Hey, like, I'm playing music on your phone now," and I closed everything. But I think I just saw a Tinder profile. Are you on Tinder right now? And he was like, "No, I'm not on Tinder." And I don't know, Sophie. I don't know what came over me, but I was like, "This is lying." And so I took his phone and I went immediately into his finance app. It was labeled finance. I went into it, opened it. Oh, look, there's Tinder. Opened it up. He was having 2 conversations with girls that day. And that's when I was like, okay, I couldn't even have a conversation with
Wow.
him. He's so drunk. So I was like, okay, I'm going to pack up my stuff. I'm not going sailing. I'll talk to you later. We can talk tomorrow. And then he was he wouldn't take any of my calls because he knew I was going to break up with him. I wanted to have a conversation and say like, hey, this isn't working out. And then he like held on to my stuff. He wouldn't give me my stuff back, and it was kind of like a whole thing. But yeah, that was the progression of that. But that was 3 strikes, you're out, baby. I like very much so immediately saw that my boundaries were being crossed. That it's a little bit different when you're dealing with people who have addiction issues. That's like a different extreme because as they can be wonderful people, they can be amazing, but this addiction adds an extra layer of like their inability to see how they're harming themselves and people
Yeah.
around them. And so I was like, all right, I'm out. I'm not, I do this in my job. I worked in a psych unit. I dealt with people who had drug and alcohol abuse all the time. Like, did it with my whole life with my parents. I was like, I'm out. I'm not doing it. So that
Yeah.
relationship ended.
Wow. I think it was almost like it was a bit of a test relationship for you, where it was like, how much of this are you willing to accept, and like what level of self respect, and how much growth have you done on yourself to get yourself out
Yeah.
of these situations, because you've been here before, kind of thing. And I think that
Yeah.
happens like quite often. Like I feel like I've got examples very similar, in the sense of like um whatever thing that whatever thing I've been working through in my life, I've then attracted somebody in to almost
Yeah.
like mirror me, and show me where I still need to work.
Well,
Basically,
it's
not that
almost
you
like
needed to do more work, but
well, it's the universe being like, all right, so you said you're working on this. You're working on this. Are you really? Here you
yeah.
go. Let's give you the same situation over and over again and see if you react any differently.
Yeah, and I definitely have had that over, like, to even to like really minute details. I've had that over and over again. It's been like a real pattern for me in relationships, and I think going back to that like conversation at the beginning of like with Saida and Matthew, who were talking
Mhm.
from like different perspectives. I feel like, like you clearly in that situation with this guy had the self-respect to, and you'd already done the work to know that this wasn't acceptable for you and you could walk away. But had you not have done that, had you not have experienced some of the things that you'd already experienced and like done that work, you might have just stayed and thought,
Yeah.
oh, like this is
This is normal.
acceptable, this is
This is
normal, this is
fine.
okay. In which case, whenever, because inevitably it probably would have ended, you would have just had to have had quite a lot of self-compassion for you, because those things weren't happening. He wasn't doing that like like in a way to like hurt you. He was just, that's just how he was, like that's just whatever he was dealing with, he was going through that, and like whatever.
Yeah.
But from the point of like Sadia, she would have blamed that on you. Like she would have said,
Yeah.
well, you didn't have the self-respect to walk away from it, kind of thing.
Which what I'm going to say is, right, this is the first guy I dated after like a 3-year relationship ended. And this was a very big relationship for me. The guy was really great. We didn't work out. But at the time when you're in it, like you're in the breakup, it hurt a lot. And at the same time also, so within that previous year before I dated this guy, my dad had died. And
Mm.
that was like a whole thing. So my dad had passed from end-stage liver failure, then this relationship with this guy ended, and this was in my transition before I was planning to leave. I was like in the midst of like planning to leave in the year to start traveling. And so I was in this like vulnerable spot, which is like, okay, so would you say that it was just I was vulnerable and I was looking for comfort and care, and like maybe I immediately missed the red flags on our first or second date? And then
Maybe.
therefore is that my fault? Or right? Like
No.
I don't think that I don't agree. What was her name? Sadia?
Sadia.
Sadia. Yeah.
Sadia.
Sadia. I mean, I'm sure like I just think it's a really harsh perspective to
I
take,
agree.
to like it's like taking on all of the responsibility for things that like we don't have control over sometimes, right? Like
Yeah. I also
I think
think
it's
like
unfair.
I agree, and that's why it riled me up so much, because I've been on the end of like quite a lot of like manipulative behaviors in relationships. And I just think, and they were talking about it like from like a manipulative behaviors perspective as well, and like
Yeah.
narcissism and things like that. And she's still stuck by that opinion. And I was like, no, clearly you've never been in this situation, girl, because like that the things that like some of the things that I know that I've experienced like were not my fault, but like
Yeah.
probably at the time, because I didn't have the self-respect, I maybe did think that they were. I then wasn't able to have self-compassion. So I think that what
Or
they were trying to say, like she wasn't trying to be like super,
yeah.
this is your fault, but I think she was trying to get people to realize that they need to take accountability for the fact that they weren't doing the healing work, in which case they were attracting these people in, which I agree from that perspective, but I don't agree that the behaviors in the moment in time are your fault. You are responsible for the reaction though, and what you do about it.
I agree. This brings up a really interesting idea. So, you know how I'm gonna babble for just a quick second. You know how there's a lot of saying that like we attract what we know, right? So it's come out. I've had to learn this, that like that spark that you feel typically with someone is often because it's reminiscent of your experiences growing up. It's like what's most familiar to you. And so it like, right? If I come from a household, like I come from a household of screaming and yelling and constant upheaval and chaos, when I meet someone who kind of like, I get that spark from them, not that they're yelling at me or anything like that, but turns out that their response to things is often to maybe yell in certain situations, or right, like we attract, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I understand. Yeah, it's true.
Right. So like here's the concept is that we tend to be attracted most to the things that we're familiar with, even if it wasn't healthy, right? Right. And this is why so many people who come from households that have a lot of chaos, have a lot of turmoil, they have to learn how to enjoy healthy relationships, because oftentimes there doesn't feel like there's that fiery spark where it's boring, right? Like
Yeah,
how they have to learn that, oh no, like this is healthy, like I'm in a safe space.
yeah,
So what's like, how can you say that you attract something, right? Like when you're just naturally predisposed to it, because that's what your experience is. You know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know,
exactly, exactly
right?
that.
Not to say that you shouldn't, right, do the work to work on yourself. Everybody should be doing that. I one think we all deserve better. I think we're all deserving of being happy and loved and feeling safe. I think that is a potential for everybody, but we have to play our part in like working on ourselves and healing ourselves and being more self-aware of what we need, what we don't need, and those boundaries that we're setting,
Yeah,
and learning how to set those boundaries. But like, right? Like most of us, we're not taught any of this going into relationships. So it's like you just go with what feels good often, which is sometimes not that great, because the spark that you might be feeling is just reminiscent of that chaotic, unhealthy environment you're originally from. I mean, do you see like the connection I'm trying to make here of like how I think it's just
yeah.
a little too conflicting?
Yeah, 100%. And I also think like it happens a lot in relationships where like your needs aren't being met, and that will also be reflective of like your needs not being met in childhood, and you learning coping mechanisms to just meet your own needs.
Yeah.
So it happens from like behaviors and also needs in relationships, because you as a child needed certain things, right? And then if you weren't getting them in childhood, you then learn your own coping mechanisms to give them to yourself. So when you then go into relationships, you're then prone to like repeating that same behavior. So if your needs aren't being met and you've never had the, I don't know, the confidence or the trainings or like the expansion to be able to communicate what your needs actually are, they're not being met, you're then going to find ways to meet your own needs, and you're finally going to get frustrated in that relationship, and the relationship is going to disintegrate because you haven't been able to speak your up for yourself and your needs. And that's again all coming back from like what you only know what you know, like, so you've never learned how to communicate. Like for me, I feel like I came from a family, there was a lot of love in the house. There wasn't love, it was just that the emotions weren't really spoken about. They were shown, but they weren't spoken about. So like then when I started into relationships, I did not know how to communicate my emotions, my feelings, my needs, my boundaries. I didn't even know what they were, because like I hadn't got to that point like in my childhood of identifying them, because I'd developed coping mechanisms of how to suppress my emotions rather than explain them. And going back to what we said earlier, like that, how that causes patterns, and you're going to keep getting the tests until you then make a decision to change it and break the pattern. I cannot explain to you how relevant that is for me in my relationship life. Like it's just been a constant stream of the same thing happening over and over again until I've decided to consciously be like, no more. And don't get me wrong, it gets better every single time, but the same thing, the same concept keeps presenting. So definitely this is why it frustrated me so much this episode, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. How are you meant to know you're meant to heal these things if you don't know that they're wrong? If you've been taught your whole life that this is the way things are, like you're in that situation, going back to your example, in that situation, you could have quite easily said, right, this is how people are. Like I've been surrounded by this my whole life, so this is acceptable behavior. But deep down, you knew that wasn't acceptable, and you knew that you deserved better than that. But it goes for like different examples of like somebody not expressing love to you, somebody cheating on you. Like if you've come from a home where like your parents split up, or one of them had an affair with the other, you're going to have that programmed into you that it's acceptable to do that, because that's what you've known, especially if one of the partners took the other one back after those dynamics. So you're then prone to then that happening to you again. Like, so you're completely right in saying that, you know, we attract the same situations but in different forms over and over again, because that is all we know, until we decide to expand ourselves into knowing something else, into doing something differently, which is a really, really difficult thing to be able to do. Imagine if you're getting into your like 20s, 30s, you're going into these relationships, you've had 20, 30 years of programming in one way, and then at some point now you're like, I don't want to be like that anymore, and you've then got to reprogram your whole brain to think in a different manner. That's a journey that I've been going on over the past 4 years, and it's been a process. Like it hasn't just happened where I'm like, okay, now I know what my needs are, now I know what my boundaries are, now I know what my wants are. It's all trial and error. So like to even figure out like what your needs and what your boundaries are is literally just thinking like, well, how would I want to be treated? What's my love language? What do I need in relationships? Like what is going to make me feel safe, comforted and loved? And then being able to communicate that is a completely different subject, because that's even harder. Like how do you get that across to the other person? But I think like when you're in a relationship and you're settling for some of these bad behaviors, it is a sign that like you maybe don't have the respect for yourself that you maybe should have. But equally, you don't know, again, going back to it, you don't know what you don't know. So until you start saying, I've had enough of this, I don't like how this is making me feel, that's probably the trigger point where you're going to start exploring other ways of doing things. You must get to a breaking point sometimes. I know that I have, where it's like, why is this repeating itself for me? Why does this keep coming up? Why am I feeling this way? I don't want to feel like this way anymore. But essentially you just can't blame yourself for these things happening, because this is the way you've been programmed. Is now when you start to realize it and you start to become self-aware, that's now your responsibility to start making
Yeah.
changes and taking actions if you are no longer happy in the way that things are.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of like situations where, because this is a common one, and I've definitely shot myself in the foot with friends because, right, you have to be careful what you say to your friends when they come to you with relationship stuff.
Yeah.
But like, if you find yourself going to your friends and repeating the same bullshit over and over and over again about, oh, my partner continues to do A, B, and C, and I hate it. We constantly get in arguments over this. Like, this is always an issue. I don't like when he's doing this. Like, he seems how he's like doing X, Y, and Z. And if you're going to your girlfriends or your guy friends or whoever, and I know guys are a little bit different. I don't think guys talk about those things as openly with their friends. So I'm thinking from a female perspective, right? If you're saying these things over and over again, and your friends are listening, they're holding that space for you, sometimes trying to give objective feedback, right? Like, if you keep coming back with the same thing over and over again, then yeah, how you're being treated is now your fault. Like, you
Yeah.
are not you've been given the space to vent, you've been validated in your emotions, and some friends will actually give you that objective feedback. I'm one of those friends that I will always give the feedback. I'll be like, "Hey, yeah, your man is right in this situation," or, you're right in this situation, and maybe you should talk to him about this, or maybe see if he'd be willing to talk about this, right? But after you've had those conversations with your friends and the issues keep happening over and over again, you need to take a look at the relationship itself and what it is happening overall and what you're willing to continue to tolerate or not. Because if you've done the things, and again, it's like if you went and had the conversation with your partner, if you tried to set your boundaries where you carve that space out for yourself, but your boundaries keep getting crossed over and over again, now is the time that you decide, okay, is this something that I just now tolerate? Or if I'm not willing to tolerate this, and she's not minding my boundaries, not doing what I'm asking, and like being, working through this together, then you have to decide to cut your losses, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know it's a hard decision and it sucks, but like that's when you do truly become responsible for, you have to show up and own your self-respect. You have to give yourself compassion. You have to choose what's best for you, which can be
Yeah.
hard. I'm not diminishing that's a difficult decision, but it is a decision you have to make. You are now responsible for.
Yeah, 100%. But I do think so many people don't make those decisions because either they're scared of like what's on the other side of that decision, they're scared of losing the person because they don't want to be on their own, or also
Yeah.
societal pressures. Like, I think particularly as you get older, and there's this like conception of like what you should be living, how you should be living this little white picket fence life, my idea of hell. The
Oh, you're
there's
gonna come back to that comment.
there's a societal pressure on like like people living up to that expectation, particularly if you've got parents that are like, oh, you need to be married, like you need to have kids, and like obviously there's a whole cultural piece that comes into that, and I'm not
Yeah.
downplaying that in any way because I know that there's some people don't have the necessarily the options. But if you have got the option and you're still choosing to stay in it, then you need to look externally probably to you and see like why are you choosing to
Yeah.
stay in that situation. And then there's probably a whole other bit of work that you need to be doing in terms of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely. And actually something I want to double back to, because you were talking about how, right, this has been like an ongoing process for you the last 4 years of like really like looking at yourself and applying things. But let me ask you this. You still dated in the last 4 years, correct?
Yes.
There's this like I think it's just like a common saying out there, like you need to work on yourself before you get into a relationship. And I think that is only half of the saying, right? And I don't, it's just I'm not saying that there is a full quote out there, but like, yes, you need to work on yourself. You need to identify a lot of things that you emotionally, intellectually, physically are capable of, or that you need, and the boundaries that you want to put in place, but then you got to go practice that in real life. And so that's where you bring it to a relationship and you see what can you, right? Ideally, each time then you're attracting a partner who's meeting you at your new level, but you might not
Yeah,
be, you might have started here and this might be the end goal, but you are taking baby steps and you're practicing to get there. It takes practice and time. And I think a lot of people don't on they don't understand the work that it takes to learn how to communicate assertively. Like that's the part. Like, can you communicate assertively from the beginning of a relationship? Hey, this is who I am. This is what I need. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. Please don't step on these toes. Right?
yeah,
Can you do that from the beginning and then see how the relationship progresses? And can you continue to maintain that assertive communication throughout the relationship when like the tough gets going, which because it always does. And like
yeah.
how do you react in difficult situations and how does that partner react in difficult situations? And it's like you said, trial and error, but it's a thing you have to practice and do. So there is this component of you need to work and heal on yourself a little bit alone, and then growth continues in relationships after the fact.
100% agree with that. And I think the key word that you just said there was, can you maintain it? Because I
Yeah.
think there's like an element of, and like from both sides as well, because there might be one of you that's done a bit of work. Because like you say, you're attracting people that are at your new level, which I 100% believe is true. Like I say, I've dated in the past 4 years. Every single relationship it's gotten better and better, but still hasn't been like perfect. And it's in the most recent one, for as an example, it got to the boundaries and everything was set right at the beginning, but then different things happened and different things happened in the relationship where the boundaries got lost along the way, and then that ultimately led to the fizzle out of the relationship. So it's like, how do you maintain it? And one thing I can notice in myself though now is that I'm so much less tolerant. Like as soon as something comes up now, I'll address it. As soon as
Yeah.
I can see something not working out, I try and figure out what I'm going to do about it. So I think, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think this is actually one of the hardest things you can learn as a person. But if you can nail it, I really do believe that you can have like really fulfilling, really wonderful relationships. But until you get to that point, like you say, I think there's a lot of trial and error. And even when
Yeah.
you have like when you have done all the work, like you aren't guaranteed to stay with someone forever. Do you know? Like
Yeah.
that's not guaranteed either, because you have to be growing at the same rate as somebody for a relationship to work. You have to always be willing to level up. When that person's leveling up a bit, you then need to level up. And it's kind of like this little stepping
Right.
stone that you need to go on that journey together. Um, but yeah, I think it's a process. And yeah, the maintenance piece, I think, is the bit where people get a bit lost quite often. Um,
Yeah. Well, it's hard. It's hard when you're experiencing intense emotions, right? Like when you're feeling threatened or unloved or right? Like when you don't feel good, it's hard to speak up for yourself. It's hard to hold like right to hold on to the convictions. I mean, I'm not saying I don't want to say convictions because it's a strong word, but like those boundaries that self-respect that that you have, but when you're feeling like unloved or unworthy of what's happening, you know what I mean? Unworthy of something
yeah,
better, that's when we tend to be like, okay, maybe it's me, maybe it's not them. And then you start to like internalize it. And it's a very slow and insidious process, I think. Like it's not just like an
yeah,
overnight thing. Um, I myself have been very lucky that the majority, I'd say like 70% of my relationships have all been really healthy. Right? Either we just weren't the right person for each other, wrong time, or right rates of growth were different. I was at a place that was ready for a serious relationship. They were not, but we were able to like at some point communicate that in a relatively healthy way, although albeit emotional and difficult, right? Like I stayed with someone for a very long time that I should not have stayed with because I didn't listen to they weren't bad. That's the thing. They weren't a bad person, but they weren't meeting my needs in the way that they needed to be met. And because I cared about them, I stayed for a really long time when I shouldn't have. I should have put that down and I should have like evaluated, okay, like, well, what in a situation where my needs not being met? And I'm not even talking in a bad way, like he was crossing my boundaries in a bad way. We weren't having sex. Like it just wasn't like I'm a one of I've got of all the love languages, my top 3 that they every time I take the stupid quiz, they're all the same. I have they're all at the same level. My top 3 are words of affirmation, physical touch, and oh, I'm missing the other one. Is it quality time? Right?
Yeah,
Quality time.
quality time.
Yeah, those all match at the top for me every single time. And I used to think I was like a hardcore words of affirmation girl. And I realized that with this person in this relationship, I wasn't getting the conversations that I needed. I would start them, I would try to have them, but they were limited in being reciprocated. They would just kind of shut down. And then also there was no initiation with physical touch. There was no, I mean, I'm not having sex for this relationship that I'm talking about, like a very significant chunk of time. I should have a plaque on my wall for I was not having sex and I was in a relationship. So, like, and those were boundaries, those were needs that I needed fulfilled. And like I would try, but they weren't reciprocated. And so he wasn't doing anything bad. He wasn't hurting me in any like excessive way. And so, but I stayed longer than I should have. And it was at the end of the day, it was my responsibility to identify, okay, is this something that I'm willing to tolerate in the long run? Is this something that I'm going to accept as the new normal in my relationships? And thankfully I did not. I chose to leave. That was very, very hard. Because I cared about this person a whole lot. But it was really difficult to do. Like it's difficult to choose you sometimes. And then to be able to express it in a way that like one, you feel like you're expressing what you're truly feeling inside, what you're thinking in a way that the other person could potentially hear it and understand it. It's very hard to
Yeah,
engage in assertive communication, which is why I think we should be teaching this from a very, very young age.
5,000,000%. I agree with
Yeah.
that. And there is just this like really blurry line, isn't there? Like, how do you? Because a relationship involves two people that have very different needs, very different boundaries, very different wants,
Yeah.
and hopefully there's some kind of common ground that's brought you together, and you have obviously like 80% of your relationship you are meeting each other's needs, but there is always going to be that probably 20% that
Yeah.
you don't agree on certain things, you don't want certain things to happen. So I guess it's like, how do you figure out like which boundary of yours is like most important versus like things that you're not as asked by if they happen? Like that's something that I've had to do quite a lot of work on over the past few years, and really understand like, what do I want? What do I need? What are my non-negotiables? Because everybody has
Yeah.
them, but I don't think we necessarily consciously always bring them into a relationship and say, right, this isn't going to be tolerated. I think when we meet someone that's like, like 60% there, we're like, yeah, great, like they'll do. But actually, they're not going to do, because at some point down the
Yeah.
line, those things that were your non-negotiables that they're never going to be capable of meeting you at are going to come and present their ugly head, and you're not going to be able to cope with it. And I think that is one of the hardest parts, is like, how do you stay in that level of worth of saying, right, I need these things.
Yeah.
80% of it is there, but like, how do I navigate that other 20%? Because there's always going to be a part of that as well, isn't there?
Yeah. Your comment, your question here makes me think of the when you see on Instagram people who have been single for a really long time and they're like, I've been single so long that I like am having a hard time dating anybody because it disturbs my peace. Do you know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about? Those like posts and
yeah,
stuff. And I think the key here is that like we always need to be actively working on our own self-worth, give our own self-compassion, our own self-love. That needs to be an active component in our lives, whether we are single or whether we are in a relationship. And I think people I myself and I've done this in my younger relationships, right? Like you get together with someone and then you're like, "Oof," and your lives are together and then you're all about each other and you kind of forget about things that you like to do, or they forget about things that they like to do, and like parts of your individual lives fall away and all of a sudden you're consumed by this relationship. And I think the key is like actively working on yourself, making sure you're working on your self-worth on a regular basis, that you are practicing self-compassion, that you're taking care of yourself first, right? And this is
Yeah.
not a selfish thing. This isn't like but right, like the whole comes back to the whole saying, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So how can you be in a healthy relationship if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself?
Yeah.
Because that is the standard. How you treat yourself and how you talk to yourself and how you take care of yourself, that is the standard for how things should be happening in a relationship. Not saying that your partner needs to do exactly what you do for you, but like it should at least set that foundational standard of like how each of you are showing up in a relationship. And I think I wanted to touch back because you're like, what are our non-negotiables? Guys, we're not talking about 6'2" blue eye finance. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about like, is this person, do they have an open mind? Are they a growth mindset? Are they actively pursuing self-care? Are they practicing self-compassion? Are they practicing self-worth just like you are, right? Like, what are those kind of more intimate goals that they have for themselves and how they want to grow and the type of person they want to be and the life they want to create? Those are the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of non-negotiables. And how do they bring that to the table? How do they include people in that in their life, right? Like, do they have open communication? Are they assertive? Are they kind? Are they empathetic? Are they sympathetic, right? Do you bring those things to the table as well? Like, what are those non-negotiables, and how does that look in actual practice? And for, I would say, a really easy way to do this is to look at past relationships. This can be in family dynamics or it can be in like personal relationships that you have. Look back and see, what didn't you like, right? Start there.
Yeah.
What happened that you're like, I didn't like that. I didn't like the way that it made me feel. What would be the opposite of that? And what is that that you're looking for? And focus on looking for that, for the opposite of those not so great experiences. That would be like an
Yeah.
easy place to start, I think, for most people, and
Yeah.
finding what you need.
Yeah, I think it also really helps to well, two things. One, understand like your attachment style, because again, going back to like your
Yeah.
childhood, you're going to have a certain way that you present yourself in relationships based on like the emotional things that you went through as a kid.
Right.
So one really good book that when I first started doing work on like this, I read the book Attached, and that
Great
really
book.
helped me understand that the way other people are showing up is because of their programming, and the way that I'm showing up in the relationship is because of my programming, and everyone's got different programming. And I think quite often we have expectations of how the other person should be treating us, but they're not ever going to be able to treat us in that way because of their programming. So I think if you can start to understand that yours and your partner's or future partner's attachment style that you want to present in the relationship, that can really help you understand the dynamic even better and understand if they're capable of meeting the needs and the wants that you have as well, because in some cases they might not be. And if they can't, again, another episode that we can do is attachment styles, but if they can't meet it because of their attachment styles, then you need to have some conversations in that relationship to see like what's going to be possible and what's not, because that can, quite a lot of things that could happen in a relationship could be avoided if you understand that from both sides. And I also think like one thing that I've noticed, like where you were talking then about, like when you get into a relationship and like everything combines and you kind of like lose sense of like what you actually yourself, which I don't always think is a bad thing, because I think there is an element of the relationship that thrives on that and like having shared experiences. But I think it's when you forget about yourself that where it gets a bit messy. And I am very guilty of like forgetting about some of the things that I need, and like, again, fine line between the things that I need and then the things that the partner needs, because ultimately you're gonna go through times in your life where somebody needs something more than you, so you have to sacrifice your needs a little bit, and that's all part of being in a relationship. So there are examples of that, but equally what I found is really helpful for me is, and because I'm not forgetful, but like my brain's chaotic, so like I do tend to forget sometimes like really basic things, even just to look after myself. Like I said to you in another episode, I forget sometimes to eat, so it's like I have to like sometimes like write myself lists of things. And also like I'm very impacted by my environment, so I have to sometimes like write a list of things, like before I book an accommodation, does it check these boxes? I now do the same with like relationships, and I'm like, right, these are my needs, these are my wants. I have a list of it on my phone, and sometimes if I'm feeling in doubt of like something that's happened in the relationship, I'll have to go back onto that list and be like, does this check one of these boxes? Because if it does, then I need to address it. And it's like it's just like a little sense check reminder for me to be like, oh yeah, I need to quickly just go and let me just get to my little list, tick, tick, tick. Because some people also just don't have the brain power, the capacity. Like I don't always have that switch on, so I have to then
Well,
think about it as an
you're not
extra
always
step.
consciously thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think a tip, if you are somebody that knows that you do have these patterns and you do struggle to set your boundaries and to communicate your wants and needs, have that list. Like do the bit of work prior to you getting into the relationship, because I agree like with what you said earlier, in that you do need to do the work separately, but ultimately some of these lessons have to be learned in relationships, and some of the work has to be done together. And you have to practice the things that you've done on your own as well, and you can't do that sometimes when you're single. You have to practice them in relationships. Like open communication is something you need a partner to do that with. So I think if you are someone that struggles with those things, have this list on your phone, like before you even get into the relationship, or now that you're listening to this episode and we've triggered you into thinking about it, get that list on your phone and start ticking. Do these match off with like the reality that I'm currently living? Because if it does, brilliant, so happy for you. If it doesn't, then there's some conversations needed to be had, or something needs to change.
I think that's all very well said. And I think to like maybe kind of surmise kind of what you're saying in terms of like, all right, guys, right? When we're in a relationship, I think it's clear that awareness, self-awareness is really, really important. And so, it's okay with where you're at. And mind you, attachment styles are not something that can be totally unchanged. It's something you can work on to change, right? So just being aware of where you're at and having an idea, right? Exploring where would you like to be and allowing yourself to daydream like that you are deserving of being at that different level, that you can have that love, that you can have that safety, right? That you can have those experiences and that you are deserving of that. Right. And then that's where you know where you are and you know where you want to go. And that's where you work to fill that gap. And you do that work on your own and in relationships, right? So getting self-aware, what is your attachment style? What are your love languages? Do some journaling. What do you like and what don't you like? Not in the context of a relationship, just as a person. What are things that you like? What are things that you don't like? What are some of your strengths? What are some of your weaknesses? What has been your preferred communication style in past relationships, whether it's intimate or family or friends, right? And like, how would you like to shift that? And then identifying, like, okay, if I want to be more assertive, what are different ways that I can assertively communicate where you're expressing, like, hey, I feel hurt when you do this. You can even do it in the positive. Start positive. I feel loved when you do this, right? To help practice shifting what you're doing behavioral wise to meet this different level of self-worth and actively practicing that self-compassion, right? On a daily basis. Identify, what's one thing that I did today that I wasn't a fan of, and how could I do it better tomorrow? What's one thing that I did great today and I'm really proud of myself for? That is a really simplistic journaling practice for practicing self-compassion, alongside all those other little tidbits of learning and like gently applying in practice, whether it's solo to yourself, starting with yourself, and then expressing to others in your life. And if you're not in a relationship, you can start by expressing things to friends, to family, and then you kind of carry that forward. Did I kind of give like a nice cohesive list there of like different practices and things? Because I feel like that's probably important with this conversation because clearly you and I get we're like, yeah, responsibility and awareness.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a big, like again, it's a big subject, and there's so many
Mhm.
different side conversations we could have off the back of this. But a great starting point is exactly what you just said. Like, just getting really clear whether you're in a relationship now or not, getting very clear on what first of all what you bring to the table, and then what you're expecting to have back. Because when you have that, you can very clearly identify whether A, you've got work to do on yourself, and B, whether if you're in a relationship or situationship, whatever you might be in, or if you're single, what the next steps are. And I
Yeah.
think instead of just sitting there, like when someone isn't meeting your needs, and you can very clearly tell if someone's, like you said earlier, saying the same thing over and over again, moaning about the same problems, there's a problem. Right. You wouldn't be moaning if there wasn't a problem. And like some of those things might be like so minute that it really doesn't matter. They might not be in your big list of wants and needs. You might be able to live with it. But if it's coming up for you and it's causing you a pain of some form, physical or mental, you need to address it. Otherwise you're just
Yeah.
going to stay in a relationship that isn't healthy and isn't right for you. And quite clearly then you aren't necessarily showing yourself compassion or respect, because you're not allowing yourself to experience something that could be better for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Anything else we wanna I know you and I could probably go for a whole nother hour on this topic, but
I've got so many stories I could tell. Maybe we'll do another episode on it, but like yeah, I think for now we'll close it there.
okay, perfect. Yeah, well, thanks guys for listening to our episode today. If this resonated with you, be sure to give us a like, and we would love to hear your feedback in the comments about what topics you'd like to hear more about. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on socials, and join the community at timeisnotahealer.com. All the details can be found in the episode description below. And remember, you hold the power to heal. Until next time, you've got this.